Awesome. Hello, hello, everyone. Um, I know folks are trickling in, but I think we're gonna get started. We have a really exciting session today. Um, so let's kick it off. So for anyone who hasn't tuned into one of these webinars in a little while, my name's Colleen. I am the Customer and Community Manager here at DScout. Um, and I'll be your moderator today. So thanks for joining us for our session, Storytelling That Sticks, Honing Human Insight in an AI World. A couple quick notes I want to address before we dive into all the good stuff is we'll be together for around 45 minutes, give or take, depending on length of the Q&A. We will have plenty of time for live Q&A at the end. So as we go, feel free to drop your questions into the dedicated Q&A box. It should be along the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. And we'll just work to get to as many as we can. And with that, I am so excited to be joined by Denise Sauerteig, our lead UX researcher at Turo. Denise, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Denise, longtime researcher, first-time video editor. I've worked for research think tanks in public media for Facebook, and now I'm at Turo, a peer-to-peer car rental marketplace. Over my career, I've had to tell a lot of data-rich stories to a lot of different kinds of audiences. And I'm just really happy to share some of my successes and even a few of my mistakes with all of y'all today.
I love that. So to get us warmed up, we're starting with a fun icebreaker. Love a literal break the ice pun there of what's the coolest share out you've ever done? I know so many folks in the audience, I feel like share outs are bread and butter for you all. So drop it in the chat of any time you kind of thought outside the box or had one that was a little different than usual. Um, and while we're seeing those roll in, um, Denise, what really made me excited about this session was I love how it's basically going to be like a deep dive into your answer to this question. But if you want to give like a little kind of TLDR for the audience as these roll in.
Yeah, so I created a series of videos, podcast style, for a diary study that I ran this year with you guys on DScout. The final episode that I made was a huge hit at my company. It was shared and commented on and remixed by others at work. And best of all, it got me out of doing yet another PowerPoint presentation. That was ultimately my main goal. And the thing is, I had never made a video before this, except for stuff that I had posted on Instagram.
That's awesome. I think so many people can relate to the best of all. It got me out of doing yet another PowerPoint presentation. We are seeing some really cool answers roll through the chat too, of like live watch parties, multimedia press, um, doing a share out from 300 feet in the air might be a particular high. I'll need more details on that later. But during this session, Denise is going to walk us through, how she made this share out, her experience like shifting into leveraging video versus slides for her share outs, some tips you can use yourself, as well as the impact it's had across the org so far. Um, and, you know, I think the spoiler of it is going to be that it's not about having like professional video production skills or some kind of huge video budget. The point is that, anybody on this call without, a ton of video experience can make a really huge impact by, leveraging their storytelling skills. So let's get into it. I think if we back up a little bit, Denise, if you want to like set the stage and share why storytelling is kind of so important, to you personally, but then also still broadly like for the field of UX.
Yeah. So starting really broad, people are hungry for meaning in their lives, and in their work. And when we find meaning in our lives, it sticks with us and it really motivates us to take action. And so the same applies at work, right? People are looking for meaningful data to inform their decisions. But what makes data meaningful to someone? We've all had that experience, I think, of presenting research insights, thinking like, finally, it's impossible to ignore this one. only to find that nobody, at least no one that's making decisions, remembers anything about your data. And we don't want that, right? Your brain is a really sophisticated filter. It makes irrelevant information forgettable and relevant information memorable. And you don't want to let your presentations fall into that irrelevance pile. The brain basically prioritizes storing information that kind of like lights up more centers in the brain. And when that information elicits emotion in someone, and is relevant to their life in that moment, it's much more memorable. Emotion is not really conveyed through an AI generated summary, right? It's really best conveyed through really good storytelling because telling stories to one another is just core to the human experience. I think that many of us spend a lot of time trying to connect with our users or our customers and hearing their stories, but we often don't put the same amount of time and effort into connecting with our stakeholders at work and then telling them really good stories, or at least telling them stories in a way that evokes emotion in them and is relevant to them, and the decisions that they need to make. But I really believe that if you can unlock both that emotion and the relevance, it'll be much more meaningful to your stakeholders, to everyone that you're working with, ultimately driving them to take action using your data in their planning and strategy. And really, that's all that we want. Like, that's how we have influence at work, especially if you're a researcher.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you mentioned that, storytelling is this kind of like innately human skill, and less so something that AI can do. This is something that, came up in some of our early conversations was that, you know, folks in UX and people doing research broadly, who have been engaging with their users have always been in this kind of like great connector role of being the ones to connect a lot of the dots and put pieces of the broader customer experience story together, shared out with the rest of their team and the org, build this level of customer empathy and really like deliver what folks want and need. And I think as we've seen like so much change over the last year, 2 years in terms of the role of researchers and how we all interact with all things AI, particularly in their workflows, which I know, I've done sessions on too. When we first started talking about this topic as something to explore, I'd love for you to like dive in a little bit more on why, even with all these like new tools at our disposal, UX storytelling is still like such a crucial and important skill, maybe now more than ever before.
Yeah, I mean, we are all inundated with so much content and information coming at us all the time, like ads and social media and the news and texts. It's essentially an attention economy that we're living in, but it's also an attention economy at work too, right? So, like your presentation or your message in Slack is just one of the many things that's vying for people's attention, especially those folks that are like really making the important decisions at work. And ultimately, we're just trying to have influence, right? But I have found that it's increasingly hard to get people's attention. And now we have kind of also the AI to reckon with in our jobs. But yeah, I mean, as AI speeds up a lot of the process of the research and then perhaps makes it easier for anyone to do research, I believe the researcher's role will really be to increase our strategic influence and strategic communication. AI can speed up certain aspects of your job, but can't, as you said, can't know the context of your company or the product or the problem. It won't know what kinds of stories really move your executives to take action. And that's why honing our craft as strategic communicators, I think, is just going to be even more important as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also as we were talking about this was, you know, as you mentioned, AI tools can help us so much in terms of like cutting down on time and a lot of the busy work. But for us, kind of hanging on to the best parts that a lot of folks in UX love, which includes like, really like being that voice like of and for the customer.
Yeah, I mean, AI can do a lot of like the process and the synthesis, and it's great at creating kind of like generic outputs of synthesis, but it can't really speak. I believe it can't really speak for your users or to your decision makers, right? And like what we want is to center our voice at our company to really be the voice of insights, the voice of the customer, right? And to do that, we need to be making like this memorable, engaging, and like creative ways to kind of cut through all of that noise, and really get our voice out there. Last week, I was actually at a talk with the head of insights from Figma. And he was saying that as AI increases the pressure on all of us to produce more research more quickly, that researchers really need to become more like internal influencers at work. That it's important that you're seen as a source of authority with credible recurring insights. And he urged us in this talk to be playful and to not be constrained by how research has traditionally been shared. He was like, host a podcast, make a video, start an internal newsletter. And of course, I was like, man, do I have the webinar for you? It's coming up next week. Um, and, Colleen, as you said, finally, like telling stories, it's fun. It's the most kind of human thing that we do. And let us all just use AI to speed up the boring parts of our job so we can focus on doing the fun things about research for ourselves.
Yes. Like keep the good stuff for yourself. Okay, so we're gonna show folks what you're able to spin up first. In terms of like the first video, and then we'll spend the rest of the session kind of like diving more into the step by step of how you actually like put these together. All right.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another research kickoff. Except this time we thought we'd shake things up a little bit and come to you podcast style. I'm Kathy.
I'm Denise. And I'm Susan. And together we're going to watch how people react to Turo communications for the very first time, like an unboxing video.
That's right. How we communicate with our potential guests and what and when we communicate it can help shape and define someone's relationship and journey with our product. Recent experiments have even shown that relevant and timely content can drive conversion.
So, for this study, we're asking the question, what kind of relationship does Turo want to have with its guests? And what kind of relationship do our guests want to have with Turo? A service that they'll probably use about once
To
a
answer
year.
these questions, we're going to follow 20 people who have never used Turo before as they download the app, react to notifications and emails they receive, and reflect on their growing relationship with Turo. And they'll even write notifications for us.
And to give you a taste of what kind of data we're collecting, here's a sneak peek from the participants.
Okay. So I know that was like the teaser for your internal team, and kind of like the first video that you shared, and it's kind of super creative and not just sharing dropping a link to a quick pre-read for everyone to review async, which I know so many people on this call can relate to and probably wondered like who actually looked at this. Can you spend some time to like take through how you engage with stakeholders and what made you land on um, the teaser video, as well
Yeah.
as video shareouts more broadly.
Yeah, so that study was about marketing notifications, as we were kind of introducing in the video, right? How to get people who've never used Turo before to click on our text and email notifications, driving new customer growth, right? I mean, ultimately, the marketing notifications weren't having the impact that we wanted, but we didn't really know why, cue UX research here. And it's an important point because the data that we were collecting was about how people were using their phones and responding to marketing notifications. It wasn't going to be like super sensitive data or involve vulnerable populations. So I thought like, hey, I can have, a little bit of fun with this. So we created some really great screener questions. And even from the screener, before we started the study, we were getting some really good video content, and some, pretty engaging responses from these applicants. So I thought, well, let's create a teaser trailer for the study out of that screener data, which was essentially a study kickoff. So rather than having a meeting with everyone and like going through the research questions and timeline, I was like, let's do it as a video, share it async in a study channel, um, on Slack. And so that was just the introduction for that. It was like a 2 to 3 minute teaser trailer. Um, the rest has participant data, so I can't really show it. But I'm just going to say there were like 3 reasons that I landed on video shareouts for this project, especially for that first one. The first is that I was really tired of making PowerPoint presentations. Like, I just wanted a new challenge. And as I said, I knew for this study that like the data that was going to be coming in was going to be kind of fun. I was working with the marketing team for the first time. Like, those are people who appreciate something different. Diary studies themselves, I think probably as we all know, produce so much video and image content. And I really wanted to be like true to the data coming in. Participants create all this video for us. They take screenshots. You're watching it like you really feel something. And I wanted my stakeholders to kind of have that same feeling and understanding about the data. So turning video data into video shareouts makes sense. And then the third reason is that was the first video I ever made. And I know like everyone watching this webinar can tell that it's the first video I ever made because you just watched it and it is not very good. But I had to start somewhere. This was a like low risk video project shared in a low risk environment. It wasn't a final readout and it like wasn't going to be seen by any scary executives. Basically, I ended up sharing it. We created a Slack channel just for the study, and we popped it in there. But rather than just being like, "Hey, watch this and let me know, if you have any questions," we were really intentional with what we did with it. So, I put it in this Slack channel and I tagged people and asked really specific questions like, here's a 2-minute video. Hey, at head of marketing, what are you most excited about learning right now? Hey, product lead, we know you're struggling with, this particular thing. What do you need to hear from these research participants to make a decision? And then also a couple fun questions like, what's your favorite podcast and why? We're looking for inspiration. And it really worked, it was async, people responded to it. And the first big success was like everybody watched the video. I was just like, I knew something was happening here. So everyone watched the video and everyone responded to the questions that I posted in there. I immediately heard things like, "Oh my God, how fun!" or "I can't wait to see the data." And then I love captions. I heard "I love captions" over and over again. And I was like, okay, if folks here take anything away from this webinar today, it's to always have captions. So because of the success of like just that first little teaser trailer, I was like, great, this is going to be a multi-episode podcast series. We're not going to do a final presentation. We're just going to go all in on video and kind of see what happens.
Awesome. I will say, as someone who is a big subtitle girly, I can very much relate to you always have to have captions.
Yeah, I mean, it's great for accessibility, but it also turns out that people just love reading the captions and hearing it at the same time. It's really great for really storing that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so how many videos did you end up producing in the series?
Yeah, so this diary study went on for about 6 weeks. Not the whole data collection, but research studies like this can kind of take a little while. So I ended up producing 4 videos in the podcast series. That first trailer that I just showed you guys, that included some of the screener videos. So that was really even before we like finally, picked the participants and kind of really kicked off actual data collection. It allowed us to get people excited and show some pretty fun and engaging video. What you don't see in that teaser trailer are things people were saying like, oh, I always check my notifications on the toilet, or I think of my phone as my second wife, but the one who I trust unconditionally. It was like these things that like people just really respond to, and they're kind of funny and engaging. Um, then there were 2 more videos with, insights and data that we were learning along the way. We had a big kind of in-person brainstorm. And then the final video was a 15-minute video of essentially the whole study, what we learned, and that was in place of a final readout. And this sort of series, I think, is really important for a few reasons, but essentially it allowed me to experiment with different video formats. It was important, obviously, because as you can see, I was learning as I was going. I was literally teaching myself to edit videos as I went. So I could kind of experiment in these more low risk ways before the kind of big share out that was going to go, around the whole company. And it also helped to build a lot of momentum and excitement amongst this team of stakeholders. They were sharing clips, they were watching, they were really into the novelty of it.
That's awesome. And I think like making it as like almost like that limited series of like 4 episodes really kind of hopefully kept people like on the edge of their seat, like waiting for the next one. So let's share an additional video from this series, or rather a clip.
Oh, hey guys, it's me, Denise. Sorry, I was just checking my phone. I keep getting these discounts and promo codes, and I don't know, in this economy, I just can't turn down a good deal. Plus, some of these brands, they just really get me as a person. You know what I mean? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why am I watching this video? Shouldn't I be doing something more productive with my time, like training an AI agent to do my job for me? Give me a few minutes of your time and I'll show you some bold ideas for building an early and impactful relationship with new guests. Plus, you'll see some sweet, sweet data.
Oh my gosh, amazing. So I know I love this so much. And I know we showed the clip, because the rest of it had some participant information, but I think it gives like such a good example for folks in the audience of how you're able to like catch people's attention from the beginning. And I will shout out that first frame, which has like those little like pop-up notifications and the illustration on your phone with like the slightly tweaked company names and like the, news update, everything's horrible. It was just like very funny and immediately caught my attention. Um, I know we have the storyboard here. Can you kind of like talk through some of like the evolution of the video and kind of like what went into building the final 15-minute cut?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, first, hopefully you guys saw that and you were like, wow, I am so impressed. Denise really improved her video skills from one video to the next. And if you feel that way, thank you. And if you don't, that's also fine. And just know that even a super amateur person like myself can have impact at work by taking a risk and trying something new. That's ultimately like, the main sort of goal of this webinar today is to just go out there and try something. But yeah, so here's the general outline of the storyboard for that final video. As I said, it was 15 minutes long, which can feel long for a video, but I was trying to get a lot of information relayed. And again, I was really trying to get away from like yet another PowerPoint presentation. The final video was going out to everyone. At our company, that means even the CEO and a lot of members of the executive team come to our research readouts. So everyone was going to see this. And a lot of people wouldn't have had any background on the study before this. So I knew I needed to kind of include actually quite a bit of content and data, if you will. And also this was like the biggest kind of high risk, high reward video. So yeah, you can see in here, this is kind of the general storyboard. It starts off, I had been, kind of watching YouTube videos and just trying to get inspiration for content. And I saw something on this dog influencer video that I follow had an animated intro. And I was like, ooh, I would love to do something like that. I work with this super talented product designer, Joey, and I reached out to him and I was like, hey, can you come up with something? I have this kind of general idea. And he just took it and ran with it. And then he's the one that came up with that whole, slightly provocative animated intro. And he was like, this is what we're going to do. I was like, great, let's see how it goes. I wanted to come up with like a logo for our UXR team. That's where, this kind of second slide is. I just kind of threw something together and thought, okay, here, let's really create a brand. And then essentially, like, as I kind of went through it, again, I really wanted to center, myself and the other researchers who were working on this as the hosts, the voice of the insights, the voice of the customer, so that we're kind of embedded throughout, right? We're the ones that you want to come to for knowledge and recommendations. I had a lot of great participant video and data so that, throughout here, people are also hearing straight from the research participants themselves. There's captions throughout. There's kind of different types of content in here. There were periods of time where, or, parts of the storyboard essentially where I did almost like kind of a Loom style video where I am kind of presenting some slides and some participant video, and it's sort of a screen and screen sort of a thing. And I essentially structured it as like three big insights and then three big opportunities. One of my co-researchers kind of popped in as a surprise as a co-host. That really helped to kind of switch it up so it wasn't, just like all Denise. Um, I had these title slides, and essentially the thing is you just want to kind of keep the movement going, edit it so that it's like moving along, but you're also having, a good amount of content in there. Because there was this kind of me essentially sort of hosting the introduction, I also wanted to close it out that way. And I had the intro slide as well as the kind of closing out slide. So you want it sort of sandwiched the same way that you would when you're watching a video, like on YouTube or on TV.
Awesome. Yeah, I love how you broke this down. I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat on questions of like how long did it take to put the full 15 minutes together, as well as like what were the different tools that you used?
Yeah, so this was a 15-minute video. It took me about 15 hours. So I didn't save any time from having to do like a big readout or a PowerPoint presentation. Um, but again, I was also teaching myself how to edit videos, while I was doing it. Luckily, I had actually budgeted enough time, or we, the researchers, had budgeted enough time for this research study, so it worked out okay. I used a combination of the playlist builder in Dscout, which is just really awesome for like tagging videos, making clips, and like creating these playlists of insights. And then I was using a tool called Descript, which is just a really awesome video editing tool that I literally taught myself. And it has a very useful AI assistant in it that can really help you put a lot of the videos together. It gets you kind of 70 to 80% of the way there if you sort of know what you're looking for. And then the last 20%, which is really the most important, is you figuring out what kind of story you want to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. What I've heard from a couple of our other customers too is when they're using our playlist builder, like being able to like highlight to text to help cut the clips of the different videos they have from participants, and then like have them in the playlist together that they can just export or invite people to directly. Probably a little like lower in production value than what you've put together here, but like kind of a helpful, more like low lift. Um, but awesome. Okay, so now we're going to go into, there actually was a question in the chat that is a perfect segue from Pert around, any great ideas around making our less than attractive participant clips look better. And so what we're going to talk about next is kind of building your story. And Denise, when we were talking about this, you were saying how like you started at the screener when you wanted to think like ahead to the end to the readout. Can you kind of talk through some of that?
Yeah, I think one of the big successes or big like unlocks with this study was that we created just like what ended up being kind of like the smartest screener I've probably ever made for any research study. And we just all the way from, starting at the screener, we just started to get, like I said, like really good video content and a lot of really good data. And so ultimately, with the screener, I believe the best shareouts really start at the screener. Like with a lot of things, you want to, do some backwards planning. So plan with the outcomes in mind. We often do this with our research studies with research questions. We're like, what kind of answers do we want? Let's craft some really good research questions. But you can also do it with the deliverable in mind. So, keeping in mind that if you want to deliver your findings as video, then start from the very beginning of the planning on like how to get some good video from your participants. Often with a screener, especially, for diary studies, I think we'll ask, or even interviews, like we'll ask kind of a generic question. And then what we get are like a lot of videos of a person like laying back on the couch with the phone kind of right here, making like really unattractive video content that they're not really thinking about. I think you all know what I'm talking about. You've seen it, you've kind of suffered through it. So like if your screener is really generic, you're going to get generic data. But you can also use the screener to kind of um, generate your first video, great video content, and also collect some early data and like really build hypotheses. So ultimately, like, don't be scared to ask for more from your participants, not just for diary studies, but for interviews and other times when you might be doing a really targeted recruitment. People who can follow some pretty simple instructions will likely be higher quality participants anyway, moving forward. Most of us just want to be told what to do. You can start with a playlist builder in Dscout, as you said, going through the text, like tagging these videos. And as you're watching the screener videos come in, tag those contenders and begin building the playlist. Um, Plan some prompts, I think, that will set you up with useful video content. Like we have an example here about houseplants as artifacts. Almost like when we're coming up with a really good idea for icebreakers, you can kind of do the same thing with the screeners. The point is you want to come up with something that's creative, that's also aligned with your research goals, with these like really specific instructions. I can just give kind of one example for this marketing notification study. One of the things we ask folks to do, we ask this question like, we want to know what apps are most useful to you in your life and why. Screen share your phone, scroll through the apps, and tell us in 5 minutes or less how you're using these apps in your daily life and what value they give you. Are the notifications on, et cetera, et cetera. When you're taking the video, we've said things like, do it in portrait or do it in landscape or walk around. It doesn't have to be super complicated instructions, but when you come up with something really kind of specific like that, you'll be able to find the participants who can follow those instructions. And already from the beginning, you're getting some really great video content that you can use to share out to like kind of pique the interest of your stakeholders and, really, as we said, kind of cut through that attention economy even before the study's begun.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then, I know you kind of plan from this from the screener, which is awesome. And then I know people definitely have some like additional questions around how you actually like crafted these compelling videos together.
Yeah, so the two main tools that I used was Dscout, obviously, and then Descript, which was the software that I found and just sort of got really into. And then I was like, okay, now that I'm learning this, I can't, go off and try anything else because it's kind of like a sunk cost of time, and it was great. Um, but this slide kind of shows some of the like video guidelines that I sort of came up with or used myself. I'm sure there's people in the webinar today that are like, much more skilled video editors than I am. You can also probably go to Ask ChatGPT for some general video guidelines. But here's what worked for me so that I could make these video shares that were really clear and concise. Um, yeah, so if you're using Dscout to collect data, whether it's diary studies, you can do it for usability tests as well, or interviews. Use the playlist builder to start editing together video data that really shines. As we were saying, like you can kind of tag it and title it by emerging insight, and then you can import it later into another video editing program. There are a lot of low-cost tools out there to layer in like the hosting and the slides and the text. Yeah, as we said, kind of plan ahead, do this backwards planning. So plan ahead for getting quality video as data, be really specific with your participants, specific but simple guidelines. When should it be a selfie? When should it be kind of contextual? When can it be their screen? They will respond if you give them, just clear instructions. Um, Let's see. Keep it short. Yeah, so this is the hardest part. I think you want to be kind of ruthless with your editing. So when you're putting these videos together, you want to always be thinking about like from scene goes like action to action to action. You may have remembered in that like intro that I had, that was me in sort of these three different perspectives. Basically, for that intro, I had three main points that I wanted to say. or get across. So for each of those 3 points, I just made them different scenes and I kind of created a different POV each time. The point is like really kind of getting the pace going so that people continue to pay attention. Try to keep it as short as possible. Not all your data is precious. You just want to focus on the things that really matter. Brand it, as I said, I made like a title slide. I kind of branded both the research study as well as our team logo. Captions, you always want captions in there. And then the scripting. So if you are going to be hosting, if you are asking some of your colleagues to kind of pop in and talk and host as well, write out a script ahead of time. Like, do not ad lib. It will be a disaster and you'll just waste all this time trying to redo it. Write out a script ahead of time for you, for them. Rehearse it a few times. And then it's going to take a few attempts, maybe 3, maybe 7, to record it because the first couple are not going to be very good. You're going to be like the lighting is going to be really bad. You're going to have to rearrange everything in the background. You're not going to like how you speak, all of these sorts of things. And you want to have sort of a trusted set of advisors to be kind of watching it and giving feedback. And that's the sort of share early and share often.
Yes, and I love how you close it out with "be bad, don't be boring," of like even like a silly or like bad video is better than just like a boring droning one.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome. I know we have about 10-ish minutes left, so let's go through your framework on kind of like how you were able to kind of find your voice as you started creating these videos.
Yeah, so this is a framework I've been kind of noodling on. You guys can tell me if it resonates or not, but I really believe that a story will land if you can match kind of these 3 parts of a triad: your voice, the audience's ears, and the data. Like, who are you? Who are they? And then what is the data or the content? So when we're thinking about your voice, this is about you identifying your storytelling self. Where do your strengths lie when telling stories? What makes your personality shine? For me, like I'm not concise. I don't have like a professional voice. I don't make TLDRs of a TLDR, but I am kind of, funny and quick-witted. I like to tell stories of characters and my stories are pretty information dense. And so it's just like lean into your strengths. You're gonna kind of tell the best story if you really do that. When it comes to your audience, this is about, thinking about like the tone at work, the type of company that you work for, also how to make things really relevant and put things into a business context so that your stakeholders or your executives really understand that like the story you're telling them is going to help them also have impact and make decisions. Business understanding is good storytelling. You really want to be able to match kind of your voice with how your company wants to hear things. And then ultimately, there's your data, right? You kind of want to honor the data and how you collect it and the people that it represents. If it's a sensitive topic like data privacy or you're working with vulnerable populations, maybe being funny was not the best idea. But if it's something more lighthearted, then you can kind of think about the tone there. And so I think that it's like, those 3 things need to match up. And that's when you're going to deliver a really good story, or at least keep them in mind as you're kind of honing your craft and thinking about what your shareouts are going to look like.
Absolutely. I realized I was supposed to share my animation as we were talking, but that's okay. And then as we're getting to the end here, what really kind of struck me about your, the 2 videos that we saw of yours was how much the second one kind of reminded me of when you see those like different types of like TikToks or Instagram reels. Wondering if you can kind of like talk through that aspect a little bit as well.
Yeah, so, part of the sort of finding your voice, I think, is, just like making a list of content that you consume and like their entertainment pros and cons, both in and out of work. This is like just me putting my researcher hat on. And once I was like getting into this whole video editing thing, then like anytime I was listening to a podcast or like watching an Instagram or watching TV or something, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, how are they doing this narrative structure? Why is this interview so compelling? Look at this cool animation. Oh, it's an unboxing video. Like, maybe I can, like, I'm really engaged in this, and like maybe there's something here that I can experiment with and just kind of do that at work as well. TED Talks, maybe you're into graphic novels. There's just a lot of places, like in our real lives, if you will, that we can get inspiration from because, like, everyone at work is watching all of this stuff too. And so when you see it kind of pop up in Slack and they're like, oh, what's this? Like, that is really how you get people's attention. So just encourage you to be a little creative, hopefully within the confines of what is still considered professional at your workplace.
Yeah. So I know we're getting close to Q&A time, and we've spent some valuable time on kind of like what to do and walking through how you've been able to put these together. I'm also curious if of like what you've learned from mistakes you've made, or like what you'd recommend that from your experience folks not do.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a bunch of stuff, but most recently we did do a couple things experimenting, especially with AI, that just kind of went south pretty fast. So the first one was, after the sort of like success of this podcast series, we share out this like monthly, insights highlight to the whole company. And my boss, who is amazing, but was like, oh, well, maybe we can just, turn this into like an audio podcast because it seems like people like that. So he kind of clicked a button on Notebook LM and it just generated this, AI kind of avatar voice podcast of it. And it was awful. Like, it was just so bad. And I was like, no, no, we want to center our voices. We want to be like, creating something that has like emotion in it. So that was like a little bit of a risk that we were like, that's not very good. I did something even just last week where I had all these videos of usability tests. So, it's people clicking on stuff on the website. And I was like, oh, well, what if I had this like AI avatar face and it was just talking? Like maybe people would like that, to kind of like give it a character. And I shared that actually back with, my boss, and he was like, oh my God, Denise, this is terrible. Like, we want people to be connecting with our customers as real people, and this is doing the opposite thing. And I was like, okay, great. It's good to know what's not working so that we can really hone in on what might be working.
Yeah, absolutely. The definition of live and learn. And okay, so last thing before we transition over to answer a couple questions, like what's next? What's next for you and your team as you kind of explore more with like multimedia for shareouts?
Yeah, so I'm starting a internal podcast because everyone needs one more podcast, but with business leaders, where I'm going to be interviewing different business leaders at work, kind of like a company culture type of a thing. Really excited for that. I have some interesting ideas of like ways to kind of shake up the interview format, just based off of other kind of NPR podcasts that I've been listening to and watching. There's something I've been wanting to do that I haven't done yet, which is make these kind of like reaction style videos. When you're giving a presentation at work, the Q&A is often the most like juicy part. That's when all the people from like different parts of the company come and they're like, oh, well, this is what I think, or I have these questions, or I'm going to commit to this. I want to take that and put that in a video. I wonder if people have done this before, where I just show them, on video, like the participant data or participant video, and get them to kind of react live to it and then talk about how it's going to inform their work and then share that out async. So we're kind of taking the best of the Q&A and putting it in video. And then this last little second video here, this is something we've also been experimenting with. This is my coworker, Justin, came up with this idea. These are fake quotes. But basically, like, sometimes you're interviewing your users and it's really sensitive data. You don't want to get them on video. But you could take their quotes, put it into a tool where you have an AI voice, or maybe even your own voice kind of reading it out loud with the captions. And it's a way to kind of honor the sensitivity of the data, but like in 10 minutes, you can create this kind of like super short video that you can share out on Slack and get people to react to it. So those are kind of different levels of investment.
That's amazing. I know I just like briefly shared like the non-audio version of those clips, the like kind of the sound wave moving. I wonder if that could also be like a potential solution for folks where they're getting great quotes from participants and they want to have some level of life to it, but maybe they're hopping into this process midway through and like all the videos, like, them on the couch, like too close to their face, could still be a good way to make it come to life. Um,
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Amazing. Okay, well, with that, I know we ran a little long, but I think we're gonna still grab some time for Q&A for anyone who can still stick around. So many people have added questions to the Q&A box. Thank you for that. So we'll just dive into to the first one. So we had a question from Stella, and I think I saw something similar in the chat as you were kind of talking through sharing this on Slack for the first time around was there any additional documentation that you did around this in addition to the video episodes, or were you able to just kind of like let these video episodes, speak for themselves and that's how they live?
Well, so in the end, we did do a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation, kind of several weeks after the study ended. I was really trying to avoid that. I wanted to let the videos sort of speak for themselves. But I did end up having kind of one final meeting afterwards that wasn't really a recap of the whole study, but it ended up being more of a kind of a meta-analysis that included what we learned from that study plus a few other things. So I did have that deck. And we did host like a brainstorm about three-quarters of the way through the study where we brought everyone together. I think at the beginning, someone mentioned it in the icebreaker that they were doing watch parties and essentially did that. We brought all the different stakeholders together from the team. We did a watch party of a lot of that kind of content that was coming in. And we brainstormed with them, like, what does this mean to you? What do you think are the big insights? Like, what are we going to do moving forward? And actually, I ended up using a lot of that for the kind of final readout, and that also lives as a fig jam that's there for anyone to access later on. And I find that most people don't, but it is there, and it was something that we ended up, kind of writing up in that sort of final readout that we did.
That's awesome. Okay, this next question, I'm seeing a few that feel similar, is around, you know, how has this been for like adoption in terms of the rest of your team or the other researchers you're working with? Starting to try video as well, and kind of like what would you recommend for any researchers who are looking for ways for their shareouts to stick, but they're like not really comfortable being on video?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everyone has to go in and be like hamming it up in front of the camera. Again, if that is like true to your own voice and personality, then great. Yeah, so we have this like small but mighty research team, and we're very collaborative, and we get really excited when someone else has success at work. Some of the other folks have, been experimenting more with the video clips. That example I showed you of like the kind of audio only quotes, that was actually from one of my coworkers who had tried that. As I said, my boss was super into it. He was trying the sort of easy way out with the podcasting, but now we're all kind of getting into this way of like, how do we, really center our voice in it all. And so everyone has kind of their thing that they are experimenting with. So it has, I think, helped, just sort of further along the visibility of our very small research team at the company, and that it's like, a rising tide lifts all ships. If you don't want to be like hosting video content, or you don't want to put all the effort into all the video editing, which I mean, it really does take a lot of time. I think there are a lot of other things you can be doing. You could do audio only. You could be kind of starting a newsletter. Um, if you're in person, I think that there's a lot of stuff that we used to do kind of pre-COVID, where you have like a room with all the sort of things printed out and ideas, and people can kind of do like a walkthrough of insights. Those are some of the ideas I have. I'm sure folks in the audience also have their own ideas, but I think it's really just about like moving the insights beyond the decks and into the organizational conversation. And so like when you're thinking about what it's like, at your company, at your organization, whether it's more old-fashioned or if it's an innovative startup or what have you, like what's going to work? What are these sort of like openings for you to just try something new?
Yeah, I think something that flows kind of naturally into this as a next question is around, the response from your stakeholders after after the final video had been delivered in terms of what were the takeaways? Was it more positive? Or like did it feel more worth it to do it this way compared to previous presentation formats, if that's even something that you found that you were able to measure?
Um, I don't know about like, strictly being able to measure it. It definitely, ultimately the measure of research impact is like, did the product change and did we sell more widgets? Did we make more money? That sort of thing.
Mhm.
It definitely had impact on the product and it definitely had impact with, the marketing team, which is just one of the stakeholders that we were working with. But really what was happening was like that I think the insights were really kind of lifted off of the slides. People were making clips of parts of the video, especially the final one, and sharing it around and saying things like, this is what we need, and they were using it in their own presentations. Um, I got a lot of positive feedback from a lot of our execs. People were saying things like, "Oh, this was great. I watched it on the subway at 1.25 speed, the same way that I do with all my other podcasts." And I was like, "Oh, I'm just so honored." Um, and so, I mean, I think it's that they were able to really like repeat back some of the quotes of, the participant data that was in there. There were some nuggets in there that were super important, I think, for like product strategy. And those were the things that I started to see kind of going around. And to me, I felt like that was, it was worth all the time and the investment, and also kind of putting myself out there as like, you know, a first time video editor and just seeing what happens. Um, so in terms of just like clicks and visibility and watching, like that was much higher than a traditional, kind of Google slide deck that we just have living in our research repository.
Yeah, definitely. Also, I just love like when you're mentioning your colleague who said I was able to watch it on 1.5 speed of like kind of the accessibility of video in some ways of like I don't know if it's just that it's more engaging or it feels like an easier entry than like sitting down to go through a deck or something like that or like joining an hour-long meeting. And then someone made a great point in the chat, shout out to Anthony, around like the intangible benefits from sharing this as well of like excitement around like the work you're doing, the projects your team's taking on, and then like broader empathy across the org. So I definitely echo that too.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, well, we've all been, if you work in UX and you've been working for more than a couple years, you know that it's a kind of a rough job market out there. UX is often the most vulnerable in when layoffs and these sorts of things kind of come around. And so we're always trying to think of ways to just, again, like be more visible, be more indispensable, cut through that noise, be the voice of insights, do something that's meaningful and memorable. And again, like just really kind of evoke emotion in folks so that like you are essentially like up there as a like a strategic decision maker just like anybody else. And I think these sorts of things, or in my experience, these sorts of things have been really helpful. And it's really kind of helping to just advance our research team and just bring the visibility up at work.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Denise. I know we ran a little long. I know we could also continue to talk about this for a long time. We wanted to share a couple ways to stay in touch. Connect with Denise on LinkedIn. Keep the conversation going in the People Nerd Slack. Like if anyone ends up trying, dipping their toe in the video waters, like share your bad first drafts with us, if you want to. And like let us know how you're kind of starting to implement some of these video how-tos in your share outs. Well, with that, we're going to wrap it up, but I hope everyone has an excellent rest of their Tuesday. And thank you again so much, Denise, for all the awesome work you're doing and sharing it with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity, and thank you to everyone who was here. I can't wait to like go through the chat and just get inspiration from all the fun stuff that everybody else is doing as well.
Yes, I'll be sending the chat over. Thank you everyone, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.